This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, recorded at 13:30 GMT on Thursday the 20th of October. I'm Oliver Conway with a selection of highlights from across the BBC World Service. Coming up.
And I didn't even apologize to my wife, who's sitting right here, because I didn't do anything.
Donald thinks belittling women makes him bigger.
We'll bring you the key exchanges from the third and final US presidential debate. Russian warships move through the North Sea towards the Mediterranean.
Like so many of the things the Russians have done in this campaign, is to demonstrate power, to show off, if you like. This is showboating personified, if you like.
The Tinder court case that's divided opinion in Australia. And redressing a past wrong as gay men are offered pardons for historic convictions. But not everybody wants them.
I will not accept a pardon. To accept a pardon means you accept that you were guilty. I was not guilty of anything. I was only guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
More on that later. But first, after a bad couple of weeks, the final presidential debate in Las Vegas last night was seen as perhaps the last good opportunity for Donald Trump to wrest back momentum from Hillary Clinton. So how did it pan out? Here are some highlights.
I will defend Roe v. Wade, and I will defend women's rights to make their own health care decisions. And we have come too far to have that turned back now. And indeed, he said women should be punished. And I could just not be more opposed to that kind of thinking.
If you go with what Hillary is saying, in the 9th month, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb of the mother just prior to the birth of the baby. I don't know Putin. He said nice things about me. If we got along well, that would be good. Look, Putin has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America, that you are willing to spout the Putin line. These cyber attacks come from the highest levels of the Kremlin, and they are designed to influence our election. I find that deeply disturbing, and I think it's time.
She has no idea whether it's Russia, China, or anybody else.
I am not quoting myself.
No idea.
I am quoting
Hillary, you have no idea.
17 do you doubt 17
our
military
has
and
no
civilian agencies? Well,
yeah,
he'd rather believe Vladimir Putin. I find that just absolutely.
She doesn't like Putin because Putin has outsmarted her at every step of the way. Excuse me. Putin has outsmarted her in Syria. He's outsmarted her every step of the way.
I do get to ask some questions.
They're coming in illegally. Drugs are pouring in through the border. We have no country if we have no border. Hillary wants to give amnesty. She wants to have open borders. We have to have strong borders. We have to keep the drugs out of our country. Right now, we're getting the drugs, they're getting the cash. I want to build the wall. We need the wall. The Border Patrol, ICE, they all want the wall. We stop the drugs. We shore up the border.
Getting rid of any violent person, anybody who should be deported, we should deport them. When it comes to the wall that Donald talks about building, he went to Mexico. He had a meeting with the Mexican president. Didn't even raise it. He choked. So I think we are both a nation of immigrants and we are a nation of laws, and that we can act accordingly. And that's why I'm introducing comprehensive immigration reform within the first 100 days with a path to citizenship.
First of all, the media is so dishonest and so corrupt, and the pile-on is so amazing. The New York Times actually wrote an article about it that they don't even care. It's so dishonest, and they've poisoned the minds of the voters. But unfortunately for them, I think the voters are seeing through it. I think they're going to see through it. We'll find out on November 8th, but I think they're going to see through it.
But, sir, there's
if you look, excuse me, Chris, if you look at your voter rolls, you will see millions of people that are registered to vote. Millions. This isn't coming from me. This is coming from Pew Report and other places. Millions of people that are registered to vote that shouldn't be registered to vote. So let me just give you one other thing. So I talk about the corrupt media. I talk about the millions of people. Tell you one other thing. She shouldn't be allowed to run. She's guilty of a very, very serious crime. She should not be allowed to run. And just in that respect, I say it's rigged because she should never have been allowed to run for the presidency based on what she did with emails and so many other things.
Let me respond to that because that's horrifying. You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him. The FBI conducted a year-long investigation into my emails. They concluded there was no case. He said the FBI was rigged. He lost the Iowa caucus. He lost the Wisconsin primary. He said the Republican primary was rigged against him. Then Trump University gets sued for fraud and racketeering. He claims the court system and the federal judge is rigged against him. There was even a time when he didn't get an Emmy for his TV program 3 years in a row, and he started tweeting that the Emmys were rigged against him.
Should have gotten it.
This is a mindset. This is how Donald thinks. And it's funny, but it's also really troubling.
Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, a flavour of their debate. But the key moment came when Donald Trump refused to say whether he would accept the result of the election if he lost. With more on that and an assessment of the contest as a whole, here's Laura Bicker.
The two candidates went straight to their podiums. No handshake, and they both avoided eye contact. So far, so familiar. But this debate did have something new, a deep discussion about policy differences, gun laws, abortion, immigration, and whether or not to build that wall with Mexico. But after the first 30 minutes, the restraint broke down, and it went from civil to civil war. Hillary Clinton was pressed on emails which are thought to have been hacked by a group in Russia.
And she's playing chicken. Look, Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the
puppet.
Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America, that you encouraged espionage against our people.
And after 35 minutes, Mr. Trump threw his first set of insults during a discussion about foreign policy.
She's been proven to be a liar on so many different ways. This is just another lie.
And when it came down to recent allegations that Donald Trump had groped women, Mr. Trump repeated his claims that this was a story planted by the Clinton campaign.
Those stories have been largely debunked. Those people, I don't know those people. I have a feeling how they came. I believe it was her campaign that did it. Just like if you look at what came out today on the clips, where I was wondering what happened with my rally in Chicago and other rallies where we had such violence. She's the one in Obama that caused the violence. They hired people, they paid them $1,500, and they're on tape saying, be violent, cause fights, do bad things. I would say the only way, because those stories are all totally false, I have to say that. And I didn't even apologize to my wife, who's sitting right here, because I didn't do anything.
Donald thinks belittling women makes him bigger. He goes after their dignity, their self-worth, and I don't think there is a woman anywhere who doesn't know what that feels like. So we now know what Donald thinks and what he says and how he acts toward women. That's who Donald is. I think it's really up to all of us to demonstrate who we are and who our country is, and to stand up and be very clear about what we expect from our next president.
So given this mass conspiracy, would Mr. Trump accept the outcome of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
That's horrifying.
This will be a key moment, played and replayed on US networks. And it's a line that will anger many in the Republican Party. This debate may have been the most informative to date, but Donald Trump may not have done enough to sway undecideds and independents to narrow the current gap in the polls.
That report by Laura Bicker. The operation to retake Iraq's second city, Mosul, from so-called Islamic State is proceeding more quickly than planned, according to the Iraqi Prime Minister. Richard Galpin gave us an update from the military base in Gayara, about 60 kilometres south of Mosul.
In terms of the Eastern Front, the Peshmerga, the Kurdish fighters, seem to be making advances. They've had a three-pronged attack heading towards Mosul city from the northeast. We understand they have taken control of several villages and two fairly significant towns, so they've been making a lot of progress. We understand from latest reports that the special forces have entered the town, presumably where they are battling militants from so-called Islamic State. So there's been a real spike in the operations. The tempo has increased significantly today with a fairly significant push, as I say, on the northeast and eastern fronts. And certainly last night we managed to speak to a very senior general here who is in charge of the operations room here, which is controlling the whole offensive on Mosul. And I asked him how long he thought it would be before troops would be able to start fighting inside Mosul city itself, which is obviously where the crucial battle will take place, assuming ISIS stand up and fight. And he gave a fairly quick answer, saying he thought those first troops might be breaching, getting inside the city within a week, so much, much more quickly than anyone had expected. But obviously we have to wait and see whether that is the case, whether what we're seeing today is the beginning of a really big push to try and get inside Mosul, certainly on the eastern side of the city, as quickly as possible, or alternatively, of course, there may be something of a halt now whilst these forces regroup and then plan their next stage.
Richard Galpin. Well, several thousand people have managed to flee Mosul in recent days, though 1 million more are thought to remain trapped inside the city. Hearing from them is rare, but a radio station based in nearby Erbil has been in contact with some residents. Our reporter Mike Thompson listened in.
For well over a year now, Radio Al-Gad FM, part funded by exiled Kurdish politicians, has been getting news into this frightened city. And getting news out too, via phone calls, often at great risk to those making them. Its founder is Mohammed Al-Morsali, a computer engineering graduate from Mosul University.
Usually, if you call a radio station, that's normal call. But in our case, somebody is risking his life. It's a death penalty in case if they found anybody who's trying to call the outside world, because they will assume he's cooperating with the coalition. And Daesh recently been breaking into homes looking for GSM SIM cards and looking for cell phones.
I'm not afraid, because this is the voice of truth and justice. We have suffered enough.
It's clear from callers that the closer Iraqi forces and their allies get to Mosul, the less IS is feared.
It's Daesh that should be scared of the security forces. We're not scared of them anymore. We saw a change in them today. They have started hiding their faces again. We're in mosques. I've been walking around the city and I can tell you that there are far fewer Daesh than before. They are filling the old cars or caravans with explosives and leaving. A whole group of the caravans and cars have headed outside of Mosul. We saw them leaving with their families.
As the operation to retake Mosul continues at speed, there are claims that IS's leader, al-Baghdadi, is holed up somewhere in the city, an idea dismissed by this caller.
As for those who say that their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has escaped the city, we never saw him anyway. He's more of a ghost figure than anything. He came to Mosul once to deliver his infamous speech, but hasn't been seen here since.
This online propaganda video, one of several posted recently by IS, depicts them fighting back hard. But Mohammed al-Morsali believes they'd much rather do battle in Mosul, using civilians as shields from the bombs and the bullets.
I have a lot of concerns about the liberation, because I know it's not going to be an easy liberation, because I'm afraid that Daesh want to have a trap for the troops coming to Mosul. They would prefer to fight inside the city. Then you have 2 million, there will be human shields.
This might help explain why thousands of civilians have been pouring out of Mosul. But this caller insists many there now fear their liberators almost as much as their oppressors.
I just want to deliver a message to the Iraqi security forces. We have been waiting for you for 2 years now, and we hope you can liberate us. But please, take care of our innocent civilians inside the city. A lot of people have heard that some of your security forces plan to take revenge against civilians when they enter. And that scares people here in Mosul.
Voices from Mosul, that report by Mike Thompson. The president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has signalled a major change in foreign policy, away from the United States in favour of China. It comes despite recent disagreements between the Philippines and China over territory in the South China Sea. Our correspondent John Sudworth told Lucy Gray what was known about the new strategy.
Most of this coming from President Duterte himself. He's here on a state visit. He's been welcomed with full military honours. And, we've been hearing for some time through his public speeches and interviews these hints of a realignment in foreign policy, often in his characteristic flamboyant language, telling President Obama to go to hell, talking of a time to say goodbye to America. But the latest comments made today after his meeting with President Xi Jinping appear to be the clearest sign yet that there is this shift now underway. He said this, he said, "I announce my separation from the United States, both in military and economics." And then he went on, this is him speaking in front of a gathering of Chinese officials and businessmen. He said this, "I will be dependent on you for a long time." So if anybody was in any doubt that he's, if you like, giving the old American ally the cold shoulder and running headlong into a warm embrace with China, this would appear to put pay to those doubts.
And how did Xi Jinping react?
Probably senior Chinese officials can't believe their luck. In terms of the reported comments from President Xi, they are, as you'd expect, measured and diplomatic, but the state media coverage is full of glee. Don't forget, relations between China and the Philippines were at rock bottom just a few months ago. President Duterte's predecessor, of course, had launched this major legal challenge through the International Tribunal, taking on all of China's claims to the South China Sea, this big dispute that has long simmered between the two countries. They were vindicated at that tribunal. China bristled at the action that was taken, and it really looked as if there was no way back, at least any time soon, in terms of the old relationship. But President Duterte, who came to power just before that ruling, has set about standing it on its head. He hasn't ripped it up, but he has certainly pushed it into the background, and now we have all of this extraordinary language, really, as he appears to be gambling that by taking a softer and more conciliatory tone, he can win aid, trade and investment that are so badly needed.
And is it hugely significant then? Does it alter the whole regional balance?
Well, I suppose it depends how much of this is really substance and how much of it is rhetoric for effect, whether this is a clever game of playing China off against the United States or whether he really does intend, as again he's hinted before, of severing ties or at least putting the old alliance with the US on a very different footing. He suggested that joint military exercises may soon become a thing of the past. And I think if those sorts of measures were to be followed through on, then it would be significant in regional terms. There are a lot of very nervous neighbours who share a coastline around the South China Sea, watching very carefully what they see as China's increasingly muscular approach to its claims. And I think if they saw China successfully picking the Philippines off, if you like, and bringing it into its embrace, that may alarm some.
John Sudworth talking to Lucy Gray. This is Global News, the best stories, interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. If you miss any of the week's events, you can catch up with The World This Week, broadcast on Saturdays and Sundays, and also available to download from our website. 2 British warships have been sent to meet a Russian flotilla moving south from Norway, apparently heading to the Mediterranean to reinforce Moscow's military campaign in Syria. Among the ships is Russia's only aircraft carrier, which is said to have 15 fighter jets and 10 helicopters on board. The BBC's defence and diplomatic correspondent Jonathan Marcus spoke to Dan Damon.
Well, we don't know for certain, but the Russian media reports have said they're heading for the Mediterranean and the coast of Syria. This is the largest show of Russian naval power we've seen for a long time. It includes Russia's sole aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, and also the battle cruiser Peter the Great, which, if you discount aircraft carriers, is actually the largest surface warship in the world. So it's a sizable presentation of Russian naval power.
And the suspicion is, the estimation is that they're probably going to try to, or not try, they will go into the Mediterranean. For what purpose is the speculation?
Well, that's the big question. And there's been a lot of rather loose press reporting in Britain about them going for the final battle to secure Aleppo and so on. I don't think that's actually the case. I mean, if there is a final battle to secure Aleppo and it coincides with the arrival of these ships, I think that will be a coincidence more than anything else. I think these ships are going to be doing three things. They do carry some strike power. Two of the vessels can fire land attack cruise missiles. There are a small number of aircraft on the carrier. We do not know how many there are. But of course, if the Russians wanted to up the number of airstrikes, they could simply fly in more aircraft to their base in Syria within hours. The second thing it does is up the naval stakes. There's been a lot of talk in Washington and elsewhere about possible military options in Syria. Some people in this country have talked about a no-bomb zone, which they say could be enforced by striking Syrian military positions from Western warships in the Mediterranean. So the Russians are greatly upping the naval ante by sending this flotilla there. And the last thing, like so many of the things the Russians have done in this campaign, is to demonstrate power, to show off, if you like. This is showboating personified, if you like. We've seen it with the Russians launching airstrikes against Syria from Russia itself. We've seen them firing land attack cruise missiles from warships in the Caspian Sea, really a very large lake, miles and miles away from Syria. I think this fits in with that. They're showing the world they can do these things. The hope, I think, for the Russians is something doesn't go wrong, because the Kuznetsov, particularly the carrier, is rather prone to breakdowns and problems. It's always got a tug in tow to make sure that if something does happen, it can be recovered.
What about, just very briefly, how does this go? You've covered lots of defence scenarios there. You've got Her Majesty's ship alongside a Russian ship. What do they do? Do they wave to each other? Do they do that thing with lights? What do they do?
Well, sometimes they do have rather formal passages, as it were, between them. But, this is pretty much a routine matter. Russian warships do transit through the English Channel. Potentially these could go to the west of Ireland as well. And basically the NATO forces, including the British warships, as you say, are monitoring, keeping pace with the Russians and just keeping an eye on what's happening.
Our defence and diplomatic correspondent, Jonathan Marcus. An Australian man has been acquitted of murdering a New Zealand woman during their first Tinder date in a case that's divided opinion in Australia. Gable Tosti met Wariena Wright on Australia's Gold Coast. She died after falling from his apartment balcony 2 years ago following an evening together. Mr Tosti was found not guilty of her murder after a 9-day trial. Greg Stoltz is a journalist with the Courier Mail. He followed the case in court in Brisbane.
Gable Tosti, who's a carpet layer on the Gold Coast in Queensland, which is just near Brisbane, he met up with a girl on Tinder. She was a New Zealand tourist that was in Australia for a friend's wedding. They went back to his apartment in Surfers Paradise. They engaged in sex and drank quite a lot. And about 2:20 a.m. in the morning on the 8th of August 2014, she actually fell from his 14th floor high-rise balcony and she fell to her death, unfortunately.
And the case against him, he was accused of murder. The jury were also considering the option of manslaughter, though, weren't they? On what basis?
Yeah, well, basically the Crown asked for the jury to come back with a murder verdict on the basis that he had intended to hurt Miss Wright by choking her, and the manslaughter was basically that he had unlawfully killed her by frightening her so much that she had no choice but to try and climb over the balcony to escape, and she then fell to her death.
But he's been found not guilty on both counts.
He's been found not guilty of both murder and manslaughter, so he's a free man tonight.
We've decided not to play the audio that he recorded the evening concerned because it's really quite disturbing. Can you just tell us what you heard in court when they played this recording?
Yeah, it was very disturbing and chilling recording. Her mother actually walked out of court when it was being played. She couldn't bear to listen to it. But, it records their sort of fairly normal sort of date night prior to things sort of turning ugly, and her throwing some rocks at him and then hitting him with a telescope. But then he sort of gets very angry and allegedly starts choking her and then forces her out onto the balcony. At this time she's screaming, "No, no, no, please let me go home." And he actually says, "I would, but you've been a bad girl." And then,
he threatens to knock her out at one point as well, doesn't he?
He threatens to knock her out. He's quite menacing. She screams no more than 30 times, and then she falls to her death.
And what was his defence?
His defence basically was that he used reasonable force to put her out onto the balcony to sort of de-escalate the situation, and he's also arguing that she should not have tried to climb the balcony, that it was, a climb that only Spider-Man would have attempted, was one of the lines that her lawyers used, and that she was drunk and behaving erratically throughout the whole evening, and he was justified in putting her out on the balcony, basically to, let her cool down, was what the defence argued.
And what was the reaction in court? Because he got a lot of support and applause on his way out of court, didn't he?
There were some people that were applauding him. There were other people that were yelling out, "You're a pig." There's a fair bit of dividedness amongst the community about him. He's probably not the most popular figure around, but he does certainly have his supporters out there as well.
Journalist Greg Stoltz. On Wednesday, scientists from the European Space Agency were preparing to land a rover on Mars. A day later, they are still waiting for confirmation that it reached its destination intact, and there are growing fears it may be lost. At a news conference at Mission Control on Thursday morning, we got an update from the Space Agency's head of robotic exploration, David Parker.
We need to understand what happened in the last few seconds before the planned landing, and that is likely to take some time.
Our science editor David Schuckman reports from Mission Control in Germany.
The lander was supposed to usher in a new era in the exploration of Mars. Instead, officials are now struggling to work out what went wrong. They know the parachute opened, but was then jettisoned too early. Also that the thruster rockets, designed to break the spacecraft's fall, only fired for 3 seconds, not 30. So the chances are that the probe hit the ground much too fast. In the hope that it did survive, mission controllers are still trying to make contact, but the spacecraft's batteries will only last a few more days.
Our science editor David Schuckman. Thousands of gay and bisexual men here in Britain who are convicted of sexual offences under a law that's now been changed are to be given posthumous pardons. Before 1967, sex between men was a criminal offence, and those convicted were sent to jail. The pardons were inspired by the case of Alan Turing, whose life was portrayed in the film The Imitation Game. The newsroom's reporter Richard Hamilton has the details.
Alan Turing was a mathematical genius who led a team of codebreakers at Bletchley Park, north of London. They managed to decipher the Nazi Enigma machine, and it's been estimated that his work shortened the war by more than 2 years. But in 1952, Turing was convicted of gross indecency with a younger man and forced to undergo chemical castration. 2 years later, he committed suicide. He was eventually pardoned by Queen Elizabeth in 2013. Under these new proposals, deceased people convicted of sexual acts that are no longer deemed criminal will receive an automatic pardon. Others who are still alive can already apply to have their names cleared through a disregard process. This removes any mention of an offence from criminal record checks. They will also now receive a pardon once their offences have been deleted through this process. George Montagu, who's now 93, was convicted of gross indecency back in 1974. He says being pardoned is not enough.
I will not accept a pardon. To accept a pardon means you accept that you were guilty. I was not guilty of anything. I was only guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My name was on the queer list, which the police had in those days. And I will not accept a pardon. I think it was wrong to give Alan Turing, one of my heroes of my life, to give him a pardon. What was he guilty of? He was guilty of the same as what they call me guilty of, being born only able to fall in love with another man.
The charity Stonewall, which campaigns for gay rights, also says the new proposals do not go far enough. For many people, like George Montagu, nothing, not even a pardon, can erase the years of hurt and the stigma of criminality associated with their sexuality.
That report by Richard Hamilton. And that's all from us for now, but an updated version of the Global News podcast will be available to download later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.